Hey everyone, welcome back to part 2 of the carb rebuild series. In the first video you saw me strip down the carbs. In this video, as you can see, they're in need of a good clean. So I'll take you through the process of how I clean them up using the ultrasonic cleaner. Then I'll jump straight into the rebuild. So to clean them, I don't use anything fancy, I just use some of this stuff which is just a basic degreaser. Not exactly rocket science, I use various little brushes to get into all of the different parts and holes. And then I just drop them into the ultrasonic cleaner for about 15-20 minutes. And that's how they've turned out. Like I said before, they're not perfect, but the point is, inside there and everything that needs to be clean is clean. Inside there, same with these bits. Inside this seal area was pretty bad. For what it's worth, that would go straight back on the bike and they should run nicely. Now I'm on to rebuilding the car back up, so I've got all the parts ready and it's just a case of obviously starting somewhere, so I'm going to start with the bowls. With the pilot jet, the jet holder and the main jet on top. So that's the pilot jet, so it's just a case of screwing that all the way into the bottom, nice and gently. Nip it up, but don't go too tight because it is just brass into aluminium. I know it sounds really obvious, but use the right size screwdriver head because it's really easy to chew these up. Just screw that in. So again, just feel it till it hits the bottom and then just gently nip it. That'll do. Then the main jet holder, which is this thing. So it's just a case of screwing this one back in. So again with this one, just nip it up with a 7mm spanner. And it might look on camera like it's not fully seated, but it is. Those threads are supposed to be like that, just in case you're wondering. So that's both of them in, fully seated. Then I'll put the main jet on top. So this is just a standard 122 main jet. Obviously, if you're looking at starting to try and get the most out of the carbs, then you'll need to take it to a dyno center and they'll change these and set it all up for you. But for now, I'm going to set it back up the way Honda has it, which is using standard jets. So screw that in till it's fully seated, and that's those two bits in. You could put the mixture screw in now, but I'm going to do that later on. Next I'll put the floats back in, and I've got a brand new float valve here which came with the Tourmax kit, so I'll install that back in. That literally just sits in there like that, and then just drop that into the bottom of the float holder like that. And you slide the pin back in, which just goes through here. So that just slides up till it touches this little brass piece here. Once it's in properly, it'll return like that by itself. Next up, I'll put the bowl back on. So you can see there's no drain screw at the minute, which is this thing. And this is the bit that you use to obviously drain the bowls out and let the fuel out. So in the Tourmax kit, it does come with a little new O-ring, so I've already installed that ready to make it easier. I'm going to put a tiny bit of grease on there just to help make a seal as you screw these back in. You'll notice I use grease quite a bit on the seals on the carbs, and that's just to try and help reduce any leaking. So nip that back up till it's fully seated. That's that bit. Now I'll install the seal here. Brand new Tourmax seal. I'm just going to dab some grease all the way around this and put a tiny smear into there as well to try and reduce any types of leaks. Don't go crazy with the grease, just put a little bit on. And obviously just wipe out any excess, you don't want it inside the bowl. And then just literally lay the seal in place. And so now it's just a case of putting that back on and put the bolts back in. Nip these back up, again just hand tight, don't need to go crazy. Next up I'll put the slide and diaphragm back in here. So to clean this diaphragm I just used some of this, just sprayed it on, wiped off any excess dirt and they come up nice and clean. Have a quick check to make sure there's no holes or damage, because if there are you're going to have to replace this diaphragm. So first of all I'm going to put this needle back in, put the washer back on. The standard setup on these Honda carbs is to come with one washer. You can actually put two on to improve performance, but if you're going to start going down the route of tuning the carbs, you're better off taking it to a dyno and getting it set up properly. So for now, I'll use the one washer. So literally just slide that in into the hole at the bottom of there, like so, and that just pulls through. And then with this piece, there is a tiny little spring in there, so make sure that hasn't popped out. If it has, just push it back in, it just literally pushes into place. And you've got a rubber O-ring there as well, so I'm just going to have a tiny bit of grease, again, only a small amount, just to try and help it go in a bit easier. So that just locates back in place like that, into that shape, and you push it in and you'll feel it click into place, like that. You might notice this needle has a slight bit of movement underneath, that's normal. I'm going to put a smear of grease down these sides here, and that just helps it slide up and down when it locates back into there. If these have been cleaned and they're just bare plastic, they can sometimes grip and not go up and down as they should. Okay, so slide it back into here, and there's a hole at the very bottom, which obviously you just need to locate that needle into. So just gently push that down. And then that should take the shape of the carb where it came out, put the spring back in, it literally just slides on there. So the spring, as you can see, is quite flimsy, so when you're putting it back on, just be careful as you put the lid on to make sure it stays in place. You don't want to bend that over and damage the spring. And then it's just a case of putting your 3 bolts back in. That's the diaphragm and needle back in with your washer, your top cap on, your 3 bolts back in place. Next up, I'll put this seal back in. That's the seal that goes back in place. I do put a tiny bit of grease in this one as well. Again, I just think it helps keep the condition of these seals in better shape. Then just line that up and put it back on, nice and easy. Should probably say now's a good time to check that the slide goes up and down so you can see it clearly there. So just lift it up and down and check that it returns as it should. I'll put the air intake on and this cap, so you can see there's tabs here and they line up with the tabs on that seal. There's also a cutout there which lines up with the shape of the carb. So just line it up, press it back in place, put your 4 bolts back in. Right, so that's the carb with all the main parts back on. Bowls are on, floats are in, caps on with the diaphragm and needle, and then the air vent on the front as well. So the other side of the carb is exactly the same process for installing the seals, so I've already done that, ready to go. Just before we start putting the seals in, if you haven't already done so, make sure you install this piece here, which is where the throttle cable attaches. If you don't put it on now and you join the carbs, you'll never be able to get this back on. So for the carbs, I've got loads of these little seals, which are obviously the correct sizes for the pipes that you need. I'll put a link to where I get these in the description. You need one obviously either side. I'm going to put some grease on each side of the O-rings and put them onto the tubes. Once they're on, then I'll start assembling them into the carb. So pretty simple really, just a bit of grease on there. You definitely want to be greasing up these connections because once they go into the carbs, you want them to be able to move freely so they don't split. Next one, exactly the same. So this is the crucial one because this is your fuel line. You might get away with reusing the others, this big one here and the one at the back you've just seen me do, but this one I would definitely replace. I'll clean all the excess off that I don't need once these are on. Obviously make sure that all these connection points here are nice and clean, so when you push it in, it doesn't try and grip and it obviously rotates nice and freely. So I'll put the big one on first. When you're putting them in, don't apply too much pressure because these bits here, they're quite easy to snap off. They are like 20 something years old. So these two point upwards like that, and this one wants to be pointing downwards. So install it in and just make sure it's moving freely. Once you've got these bits in, now you can put your spacers back in. So drop one in there. And on this side, if you're using the standard choke cable, you're going to need to put this thing back in, which would just locate into place there, like so. But I don't have this on my bike, so I'm switching it out with the spacers, which are just made up of 2 washers here. So I'll slot this onto the spacer, put my spacer in place like that. Now's the fun part. We have to put this little spring on top of here, keep that in place, whilst also joining this half of the carb on top. So I'm going to make this look far more difficult than it actually is on camera. Right, I think we're on. So just to double check, the pipes move freely. So at the top here, both moving nicely. This one at the bottom, the fuel pipe, also moves nicely as well. And our little spring stayed in place, which is good. Now you can put your rods back through. That's that one. I put a tiny bit of grease on these just to make them go in easier and not hopefully corrode in the future. Then put your bolts back on. Just nip these up either side so it obviously squeezes the carbs together. Next up, we've got to put this tiny little spring here into this little gap there. So I wasn't able to show this on camera, but it literally is a case of hooking it over the little ridge that sits in there, compressing the spring and slotting it into place. Double check that the butterflies move freely and snap back, which they are. So now what I've done is I've just used this carb synchronization screw and I've just visually set both those carbs about the same. Now that they've been split, you'll definitely have to go through syncing the carbs properly on the bike. I'm not going to show that in this video because it's a video in itself, but there's plenty of videos on YouTube of how to do that. Now we can put the carb idle screw back in, and it's just a case of putting the washer on and then the spring and screw it back into place. The whole point of the carbs is you use this one here to set the butterflies first, and then you use the idle screw to fine tweak it afterwards and get the bike running nicely. So next I'm going to install the choke into here. Sometimes these can get a little bit corroded, so if they do, just use something like a bit of Scotch-Brite like this and just give it a light rub down to take any corrosion off the top of there. I also apply a tiny bit of grease to these as well, just to help them slide in and out, and then fit your spring back onto the top, this cap on top of that, and it just screws back into place into here. This is only a plastic nut screwing into the aluminium, so just take it easy when you screw this. You only just lightly nip it up. Check that this choke plunger moves in and out freely. If it doesn't, then you might need to take it back out, put a bit more grease in. If it's really bad, then replace it. This side is exactly the same. Now I'm going to fit the choke bar slider on, and that goes on top here, but to do that you need to fit this spring on, and that locates onto the bar. So we put that on like so, with this little rounded piece facing forward, and then the washer on this side, and it's a case of lining that little piece to that bit there. Can be a little bit fiddly because you've got to line up these arms here either side, whilst also lining the spring that sits up on top, and obviously not allowing the washers to pop out of place. Then put your little washers on top, and then screw the bolt back in. And with these, just nip them up, but not too tight because the bar has to slide between the two washers. And that's how it should be once it's back on. Next I'll fit the mixture screws into here. So there's the mixture screw. As you can see, there's nothing on there at the moment, and to build this back up you need to put your small little spring back on like that, and then you've got a really small washer that slots over the top of the needle, and then a small O-ring that also sits on top like that. So now you drop that into place nice and gently, and be really gentle screwing these in because the needle slots into a tiny hole at the bottom. When you tighten this down, it needs to go to the bottom, but you need to feel it so it doesn't bottom out and snap. That's a problem I've had before with previous set of carbs. So I just really lightly screw this in, and you'll know when you're getting close because that mixture screw will disappear almost into the aluminium housing. I'm just feeling for it touching the bottom and seating into the aluminium, which is about there. So with the mixture screw, Honda recommends 1 to 2 turns out, which means from fully seated, winding it back out 1 to 2 times. I'm going to go with 1.5 turns. Some people do 2, some people do 2.5, but for now I'll set it to what Honda recommends. So an easy way I found of doing this is make a mark on there like so, and then as I rotate it out, I've got a reference for how many turns I'm doing. So that's 1, and that's a half. This side is exactly the same. 1.5 turns out. That's 1. That's a half. So that's both mixture screws set, and obviously I can tweak those if I find I need to once I start the bike up. Right, so that's the carbs rebuilt. Hopefully, if you followed along with that, you've not found it too difficult. If it's the first time that you've built a set of carbs, I'd be really interested to hearing how you found it. Drop me a comment and let me know. I do appreciate hearing back from you all. So yeah, you've probably seen it's not that difficult. The next bit obviously is to get these on a bike and get them set up. So that's it for now. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.